Every once in a while, you really have to do some research, but that can be fun too. But you get a call every once in a while that really stands out. And again, this was a while ago, but I answered the phone, hello, Brattle Bookshop, can I help you? Lady, very elderly, thick Irish brogue, and the first thing she says is, President Kennedy slept with me. Now, you have to admit that gets your attention. She stops and waits for it to sink in. And then she went on to explain that she had worked for the Kennedy family. She had been his nursemaid. When he was 3 and 4 years old, he used to fall asleep in her arms. So he did sleep with her, but maybe not what you first think. And what she had was a whole series of handwritten letters from the president. Now, presidential letters of any type have value. Handwritten letters from later 20th century presidents are very hard to get, very scarce, and very valuable. She wanted to get an offer on them. I was actually skeptical about that, but I thought she'd be fun to meet. I went to her house. The letters were fabulous. I gave her what I thought was a tremendous offer on them, but much as I suspected, there was no way she could sell these letters. The letters were part of her life. As far as I know, they're still with her family. I left a note behind. Maybe someday I'll hear about them again, but they're probably where they belong. Like I say, I can go on and on and on, but why don't I see if there are some questions, because quite honestly, anything you ask me, I can go off on a tangent. In any case, do you want me to just repeat it? Do you want to mic the... There's a gentleman right up there. Right up there.
All right.
Thank you. So I collect old bird books, particularly bird guides, but I was curious if what are some of the cool bird guides you've seen, and B, is there anything around that is potentially interesting or valuable? Obviously, things within reason, not like Audubon's craziness or anything like that, but.
Well, the question is, you collect bird guides, and are there things around, and are they collectible? Well, one of the first things that comes to mind when people mention bird guides, people don't use them anymore. Quite honestly, the internet with iPhones and all of that, you can just, or a good camera can be hooked up. So the actual sale nowadays of any type of guide of that type, or anything pure information, has dropped off tremendously because people do that all electronically. But on the other hand, that can make bird guides really interesting to collect because they tend to be around, they're not terribly expensive, there isn't as huge an interest as there was, so they're cheap. And one of the great things about bird guides is, one of the fun parts about collecting is the hunt. It's being able to, every antique bookstore, every auction you go to, every library sale, every book sale, every antique store might have a guide. So you always have some place to go. There are some that, the first edition, the very first Peterson guide, especially if it's signed, can run into the hundreds of dollars. But then you can try to collect every edition of the Peterson's guides and see how they sold. And that in and of itself can be a huge collection. So, and then there are other types of guides that have been put out. I was going to say, yes, they can get expensive with Audubon. In a sense, that's a bird guide. If you have a few extra millions of dollars, you can buy the original. And then there are a lot of other people who put them out. Chapman put out a really good guide. There are other, and it depends. Some of them are much more scientific than others. Some are literally just identification. Nowadays, with the electronics, not only do you get that, but you can get the sound. You can get the, and one of the greatest collections in the world on that is Cornell. They have one of, so I mean, I could go on and on, but that's, and it's a great collection because you can find things at very little money, and you can collect a lot, and there's loads out there. And the last thing you ever want to do when you're collecting is collect something that you can't get, because that's not any fun either. I guess the woman.
I've become the latest member of our town's historical society, and I'm younger by the average member by about 30 years. And we have an old schoolhouse. I'm trying to sort through bunches of papers and such like this. What is the best way, or what are some of the best ways to keep the quality of letters and old documents and stuff like that? The previous person put a lot of things into, plastic sheets and into notebooks, so you can look at it without getting your paws on it. And there's no climate control. There's nothing like that. I mean, are we asking for trouble here, or is it going to be?
Well, the question is, how do you take care of, and so on. I'm sure even the man who handed you the mic could answer that a lot better too. But a couple of things on that. First of all, it's a budget. Part of it's just budgetary. One of the things that, without climate control, a lot of these things have lasted a long time. They will last a long time, as long as they're not abused. If they're in these plastic acetate and they're acid-free, now one of the things you want to be real careful with that plastic is that it doesn't have that piece of black paper in it and still in it. If it is, get rid of that black paper. That would be the first thing. The other thing that I would advise, depending on how many volunteers and how many people you have, is to try to digitize, either scan, take a photo or whatever. And that way, anyone who actually has to really work with the papers, for the most part, doesn't have to touch them anymore. Then I would consult places, maybe like the New Hampshire Historical Society, and see, ask them, how do other historical societies take care of things? Ask people who've had a career of doing this what they would advise. And, and it also depends on how valuable. I mean, if you say your historical society has letters from George Washington to Belknap, or to, great leaders and so on that are worth huge amounts of money, or an original printing, the Declaration of Independence, that's a whole different thing than the family who's been in the town since it was started, and so on. And again, I would just call the advice of a major library, talk to them about what you have, maybe what it makes sense is, if it's a tremendous collection, is to have it housed and really become part of the major library with copies available. But that's all depends on what it is. And you can ask a lot of times as far as value, if you ask people. One of the things is, if you ask a person who loves what they do a question, usually the problem isn't getting an answer, it's getting them to stop answering. If you don't ask, you're not going to get the answer. What's the worst a person can say is no? So that's what I would suggest, because then it gets into the real details of exactly what you have, what's the condition, what kind of paper, how bad is the atmosphere in the place that they're being stored, and same with books and so on. So that's at least a start.
The New Hampshire Historical Society now and then does programs in conjunction with New England Document Conservation Center, and they actually give people advice on how to care for their stuff.
Yeah.
Big problem in this part of this part of the country is mold. I mean, it is a serious issue. But call the Historical Society in Concord.
Oh yeah, and they do have a digitizing software, so you can.
Yeah, and that I advise an awful lot of try to get things copied in a good copy, so that if people come in, they can use it, they can research it, they can do it, but they're not every single person handling it. And that's happening more and more. I think the lady right here.
Hi, I'm librarian at our local historical society, and we have books like this that come in, and they come in boxes, or people will drop off boxes filled with documents. Sometimes we can get to them, sometimes we can't. And trying to put value or precedents on some of these things can be very, very difficult. And what would you advise? And I'd also like you to take a peek at this book later.
Well, I'll look at all of the books and so on at the end, and I'll do it fairly quickly. As far as appraisal, one of the things that's very helpful with appraisal, at least when people ask me about it, is if you have some idea of what you have. I mean, when I do Antiques Roadshow, someone will come in with a folder this big stacked with letters, and you go, well, what are they about? Well, oh, we don't know. You have to read it. I mean, that's fine and good if you've got a half a minute, but so what I a lot of times will advise historical side people is if you can somehow make a 1, maybe 2-page summary of who it is, what it is, why it might be important, that can go an awfully long way for an appraiser to say, well, yeah, this sounds like something that could be valuable. After that, in a lot of the papers that are local, maybe town-related, aren't worth a lot of money. But they're very valuable to the historian, but if you went and said, okay, Christie's, I want you to auction this, they'll go, but nobody's going to pay for it. And actually, the biggest buyer for that type of thing would be your historical society, and I'm willing to bet you don't have a lot of money. So, but you can ask and advise, and then there are people who will do the appraisals, and a lot of times an appraiser, if they can get a sense of what you have, can give you an estimate. I mean, a lot of times I'll give a verbal estimate of what ballpark I think the material might be and what I would charge to do it, and verbally I'll do it for free, as long as it's quick. Once, though, I have to write my name down and do it formally, then it gets expensive, because then you got to be it's a lot different story. So.
One other thing is family Bibles.
Well, family Bibles, I'll actually talk about Bibles a little at the end. I actually talk about that to a degree, but let's save that for an end. It's a story I tell right at the end, but yeah, they show up a lot. Was there, right here?
Oh, well.
Yes.
We have a goodly number of books at home. Is there some good place to check, I assume on the web, general values of books by title or that, so that we know if it's worth pursuing an actual appraisal?
Well, the question is, are there resources or references that you can easily go to, either on the web or something, to get an idea how valuable the books are? That's really tricky. The way I tell that, and I'll go into it a little more, is the web or that type of thing is a tool. Now, you give a cabinet maker a really good set of tools and and they can build a beautiful cabinet. I might end up bashing my thumb with the hammer. It's the same tool. I don't know how to use it well. And it's the same thing with the web. There's tremendous amounts of information out there. One of the problems is most of it's not edited, and there's tremendous amounts of information. So, a lot of times you can look and you'll say, gee, the same book seems to be there for $5 and $5,000. Might be the same book. Maybe the person putting it up there have no idea what they're doing. Maybe there's a reason. Maybe there isn't. One of the things that I always tell people, though, if you look things up on the web, and there's ABE books, there's Bookfinder, you can always get in touch, and there are many, many others. But one of the things I always tell people, before you even start looking at the price, if you look up a book on the web on one of these sites, and you start seeing a lot of copies, 20, 40, 50, 100 copies, well, that means there's 20, 40, 50, 100 copies that haven't sold, regardless what the price is. So that's one thing to look at. One of the things my wife said, if you're a dealer or you're trying to sell books on the web, there are 3 requirements to actually sell the book. 1, you have to have the only copy. 2, you have to have the best copy. 3, you have to have the cheapest. You have to have one of those 3 if you actually expect to sell it. And normally, the cheapest is what really sells it. Because, you know, people say, well, the price from this price to that price, but, well, it should be in the middle. But if you're buying it, are you going to buy the one that's in the middle, or are you going to buy the one that seems to be the same and the cheapest? That's one thing to do. The other thing that I suggest to people very strongly is you can come to somebody like myself or a good book dealer in the area, and if you have a quick list or something like that, usually I can go through that list and I can say, look, don't worry about this, but if you want to double check, check this one, check that, and I can maybe get your list from 100 to 2 or 3. The other thing is I see someone there with a box of books. What I tell people now is line them up on a shelf. If I can see the spines, take one digital picture. You can sometimes get 2 shelves, and I can look at that picture and I can tell you, wow, this is a collection that really needs to be looked at. Or, yeah, they're all nice books.